Welcome to the African Weekly Roundup, a weekly program every Sunday here on HORUFADHI Media, where I discuss the latest news and events across the African continent. I'm Sultan Mohammed, your host and producer here on HORUFADHI Media. We hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share, and for similar content, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media. Also, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media Group's second channel known as HORUFADHI TV, where you are currently watching this program and where you can find other exclusive programs, such as Behind the Scenes and Mahahis Salam, among others. And last but not least, do follow myself, Sultan Mohammed, Suleiman Hashi, Yasin Abdi, and the wider HORUFADHI Media team on our social media platforms that should appear on the screen any moment. Let's get straight into the headlines, and we kick off in South Africa, where a new scandal could see the incumbent president Cyril Ramaphosa, Yasin. Let's get straight into the headlines, and we kick off in South Africa, where a new scandal could see the incumbent president Cyril Ramaphosa impeached from office, with the presidential election set to kick off in 2024. An independent panel appointed by the South African Parliament Speaker on Wednesday found preliminary evidence that President Cyril Ramaphosa violated his oath of office, findings that could lead to his eventual impeachment. And the president immediately denied any wrongdoing. Mr. Ramaphosa has not been charged with any crimes. I categorically deny that I violated this oath in any way, and I similarly deny that I am guilty of any of the allegations made against me, Ramaphosa said in a statement issued by the South African presidency. Now, Mr. Ramaphosa is less than a month away from an elective conference that will decide if he gets to run for a second term on the governing African National Congress ticket at the 2024 polls. Now, the recommendations were made by a three-member panel set up to inquire if Mr. Ramaphosa should be impeached after millions of dollars in cash were allegedly stolen at his private farm. The panel said that Mr. Ramaphosa should face scrutiny in his ability to stay in office. And the panel said it was evident that Mr. Ramaphosa put himself in a situation where there was a conflict of interest between his official responsibilities as president and as a business person involved in cattle and game farming, and acted in a manner that was inconsistent with his duties. Nevertheless, the chances of impeachments are slim given the ANC's dominance in parliament, where it holds 230 seats, or nearly 60% of the total seats, and typically votes along party lines. Impeaching a president requires a two-thirds majority in the National Assembly. In June, it emerged that an estimated $4 million was robbed or stolen at Mr. Ramaphosa's farm in 2020, raising questions about how the billionaire president who took to office or took to power in the promise to fight graft acquired the cash and whether he declared it. Mr. Ramaphosa confirmed the robbery at his farm but has denied any claims of criminal misconduct. The panel was formed in September to find out if there were any preliminary evidence of wrongdoing by the president. Mr. Ramaphosa is expected to answer questions in Parliament on Thursday and could face a tough time from opposition lawmakers. The inquiry is separate from a criminal investigation that police are currently conducted into the robbery, which Mr. Ramaphosa has welcomed. The report will be debated in the National Assembly on Tuesday next week, announced by the parliamentary speaker. Now, in response to the findings, South Africa's Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor said that he found it a very troubling moment for both the government and for the governing party, the ANC. We need to look at the report, study its implications very carefully, and follow the parliamentary processes and allow matters to take their course. Now, South Africa's Tourist Minister Lindiwe Sisulu has called on President Ramaphosa to resign entirely. However, on Saturday, the president's spokesperson stated that the president had no intention of resigning. Instead, the South African president said today it was up to the governing party's National Executive Committee, or the NEC, to decide his future in the face of allegations of misconduct against him. Mr. Ramaphosa, who said he would attend an NEC meeting scheduled for Monday, will be fighting for his political future. And the governing ANC's party's National Working Committee, or NWC, was meeting in Johannesburg today to discuss the panel's report, and Mr. Ramaphosa said he would not take part in these discussions. Indeed, the new political crisis has already negatively affected South African rand standing on the international market. The rand has definitely become a weaker currency in recent days, and the bond yields have kicked up considerably across the curve. Now, moving on to Mozambique, where a court on Wednesday started delivering its judgment on a case involving 19 people accused of various crimes for their alleged roles in the disappearance of hundreds of millions of dollars in government-backed loans. The 19, who included former state security officials, the son of an ex-president, face charges ranging from money laundering to bribery and blackmail related to a $2 billion hidden debt scandal that crashed the nation's economy. In 2016, Mozambique unveiled a hefty state-backed borrowing it had previously failed to disclose to Parliament or donors like the IMF. The scandal prompted the IMF and other donors to cut support, triggering a currency collapse and debt default. Now, the scandal arose after state-owned companies in the country illicitly borrowed $2 billion in 2013 and 14 from international banks to buy a tuna fishing fleet and surveillance vessels. The government master loans from Parliament and the public. An independent audit of the debt ostensibly raised for developing a tuna fishing industry and other projects found in 2017 that the government had not done enough to explain how the funds were spent and that roughly a quarter of the money was unaccounted for. It is estimated around $500 million of the loans had been diverted. Now, former Finance Minister Manuel Chang, who signed off the loans, has been held in South Africa since 2018, pending extradition to the United States for allegedly using the US financial system to carry out the fraudulent scheme. Now, former President Armando Guebuza, who was in office when the loans were contracted, testified at the trial. He himself was not charged, but his eldest son, Ndembi, was in the dock along with 18 other defendants. Now, large-scale state corruption is a common occurrence in the African continent, with billions of dollars embezzled in offshore trust accounts annually, which remain anonymous. Now, during its height, studies in 2008 found that $900 billion was embezzled out of Africa in that period, while Africa's debt remained at $450 billion. That's double the amount of debt Africa owned being embezzled by state officials, and that's staggering figures of corruption on the continent. Now, we remain in East Africa, where over to Kenya, where the President William Ruto suspended 4 election commissioners who disputed his victory in August polls and formed a panel to investigate whether they should be removed, the presidency announced. Now, William Ruto's move on Friday came after the National Assembly asked the president to form a tribunal against commissioners Juliana Cherera, Gustes, Irene Masit, and Francis Wanderi. The 4 had questioned Ruto's election win for defying maths and logic at the time, saying they could not support the opaque vote count. Now, Ruto received 50.49% of the votes cast on August 9th, narrowly beating his rival Raila Odinga, who managed about 48.85%. Now, Friday's move has opened a new battlefront between the government and opposition, and Odinga has dismissed it as a plan by Ruto to rig the next elections in 2027. Now, he said in a statement that the events in Parliament yesterday on the formula of appointing IEBC or Kenya's Electoral Commission and the hounding of the 4 commissioners have nothing to do with integrity, but about 2027, he said. Ruto wants to rig the 2027 elections in 2022, and we should not allow this, he said on a statement on Friday. Now, President Ruto has also formed a tribunal chaired by High Court Judge Agri Muchelule to investigate the commissioners and report any constitutional violations or gross misconduct they may have committed. Now, days after the election, the 4 commissioners had held a parallel news conference to say they could not be party to the results being announced live on television by the chairman and 2 other commissioners. It was in September when Kenya's Supreme Court upheld William Ruto's election victory in August 9th after ruling on a number of petitions brought by challenger Raila Odinga. Now, the court found no evidence that the results had been tampered with via the hacking of the IEBC servers, as was alleged by Odinga's camp. It, however, called for reforms in the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. Now, we'll move to Central Africa, where the Democratic Republic of Congo's armed forces on Thursday said M23 rebels and their allies had killed 50 civilians in a massacre in the eastern town of Kishishe this week, which the M23 group denied. Congo's army and M23, a Tutsi-led militia, have been locked in fighting for months in the country's relative east, with each accusing the other of initiating attacks. Now, in a statement, the M23 movement said it rejected baseless allegations made against it in the town. Now, the UN and the US diplomats also said they had information about civilian killings on Tuesday in Kishishe, the North Kivu province, but did not give any details, but both called for an investigation. In a statement, the US Embassy said, "We are deeply saddened by the massacre of civilians in Kishishe, which could constitute a war crime." Now, a spokesman for the US Secretary General said the United Nations had received reports of human rights abuses committed during clashes between the M23 rebels and local militia in Kishishe, which included a high number of civilians casualties. Now, Congo and the UN both accused neighboring Rwanda of supporting the M23 rebels, which Rwanda has consistently denied. However, both countries took part in talks in Angola aimed at finding solutions to the conflict. One of these agreements was that an East African Community Regional Force, or EAC, would intervene against the M23 rebels if it did not stop fighting and withdraw from its current positions. Now, the EAC started sending troops into eastern Congo earlier this year to help fight various armed groups. A South Sudanese army spokesman said on Thursday that a battalion of 700 South Sudanese troops would be sent to join the regional force. And finally, to North Africa, where Tunisia's most powerful labor union attacked the president's political and economic agenda for the first time on Saturday, including elections this month, saying it will no longer accept what it called a threat to democracy in its clearest challenge to him yet. Now, the UGTT union says that it has more than 1 million members and has proven able to paralyze the economy with strikes. It has at times backed the president after he seized most power last year, but on other occasions has voiced opposition. Now, in a statement, they said, "We no longer accept the current path because of its ambiguity and individual rule and the unpleasant surprises it hides for the face of the country and the democracy. We will not hesitate to defend rights and freedoms whatever the costs," said the UGTT's leader, Nuruddin Taboubi, in a speech to thousands of supporters. Now, Said, the current president, shut down the elected parliament last year, moved to a rule by decree before writing a new constitution that was passed this summer in a referendum with a very low turnout, setting up elections for a new weakened legislature on December 17th of this year. Now, most political parties are boycotting the poll, saying the new parliament will have no power and faulting procedures the president has decreed, which include bringing the electoral commission under his purview. Now, Taboubi, the leader of the union group, said the December elections would have no color or taste as a direct result of Said's constitution. Now, the president's critics have denounced his move as a coup and have held repeated street protests, and Said says his actions were necessary to save Tunisia against corruption. Though the UGTT union has previously voiced concern, it always stopped short of openly opposing the president's agenda, except for a strike in the summer over wages and spending cuts. This year, the economy has worsened, and the new government it appointed angered the UGTT by proposing subsidy cuts and restructuring of state-owned companies in a push for an IMF bailout needed to avert national bankruptcy. And this has resulted in spending cuts and more cuts in wages. And that's all the top stories here on the African Weekly program this week. Please tune in next week to hear more updates on what's going on across the African continent.